this is Sam Gerrans from samgerrans.com. Today is Tuesday, March the 14th, 2023, and today the topic is making sense of New World Order chaos. Now, it's a bit difficult for people because they look at things and they think, us against them, or them against us, or whatever it is, and none of it seems to make sense. Well, I'm not going to promise that I can make all of it make sense, but I'm going to just kind of lay out the basic groundwork as I see it anyway, as regards the bigger picture. Now, obviously, they'll have some names to call you. I get called all kinds of names. I don't think most of them are true. Maybe some of them are a bit, but perhaps not always in the sense that they're used. But yeah, they'll have some names to call you if you try to, connect the dots and work out what's going on. What I'm going to be talking about here is, I suppose you could call it a conspiracy, but it's quite a lot of other things as well. It's really, I think, to do a lot with loyalties, education systems, and essentially what I would call a caste system. Just, to be transparent, I actually don't think there's anything, not only do I not think there's anything intrinsically wrong with there being a ruling elite, I think that it's actually unavoidable that there should be a ruling elite. And a lot of the people who say, this is terrible, we have leaders, we have people who tell us what to do. Well, what's the alternative? You? I don't think so. But this isn't a wholesale endorsement. In fact, if you know my broader work, my main criticism is against the elites, not because they are elites, but because they have reneged on any semblance of noblesse oblige. Now, this is going to be a really old concept for people to get, because you've been labouring under the illusion that your opinion counts. Well, clearly it doesn't. And hold on, a technical thing here. Yep. Okay. Clearly, your opinion doesn't count. Mine doesn't either. And you're finding this out. It never did count. It was always about herd management and democracy. This idea that they've given you, it's just it's a more efficient way of keeping you passive and fat and happy. But it only works if you are actually fat and happy. It starts to break down pretty quickly if you start to get thin and hungry and unhappy and all of that. So anyway, as I say, I don't see that there is any alternative to there being an elite. People like to think of themselves as responsible and self-reliant, but they're not. And I can prove it. I'm not guessing anymore. We know. I mean, just if you remember what we lived through just a couple of years ago with the rollout of the pandemic, they managed to convince almost, I would say, a large majority of the population to wear a face nappy. So there is nothing you can't train the masses to do. There's nothing you can't convince them of. Absolutely not. Well, it doesn't hold true for everybody. You always get the outliers, the inconvenient people, the difficult people like me, and I suppose quite a lot of people who watch my channel, and other channels too, of course. But when it comes right down to it, if you're faced with the difficult choice of saving the world or giving up your iPhone, we all know which way this is going to go. Goodbye world, just send flowers. Okay. However, the elites themselves, they think you're stupid, right? And you have to admit they do have a kind of a point quite a lot of the time, given what they see. I mean, can you imagine being a member of the ruling elite of the world? I mean, we rarely do people put themselves in their position, but just imagine that you were. You were George Soros's handlers. Okay, these are the people behind people like George Soros. You're never going to hear about these people. You're never going to hear. These aren't the people you vote for. These are just sort of window dressing, and they're not even, I would say, the people who you see like George Soros and this type of people. It's the people behind these people. Can you imagine being one of these people, waking up to your wonderful bed in some, I don't know, Louis XIV chateau somewhere, and, reviewing the papers that you own, seeing that all the stuff you want to be in there is in there, and being told by, listening to the masses bleating about how important it is that most people believe a certain thing and that the majority opinion is of some value, when you yourself belong to a very tiny coterie of .0001% of the population. I mean, they must despise everybody. I would, wouldn't you? I mean, if this was your life, you'd just get so sick of it. You think, these poor retards, what is the matter with them? How could you help yourself? I mean, it's not like I'm not here sort of carrying sympathy for the ruling elite, but you have to admit, I mean, from their point of view, it must be so tedious. Anyway, at the moment, what we're given to understand and what's going on, with the US's so-called US's actions, and really the United States is a corporation, as are all countries, and within that corporation there are interests which act completely independently of the people who vote and pay taxes. A better way of looking at countries is just regard them as tax farms. Okay, they are tax creation, they're money creation centers. That's what they are. But that's all they are. Because, I mean, what are they? Are they racial? No, of course not. I mean, a Chinaman can go and live in America and become an American. An American can go and live in China and become you can become a Chinese citizen. So you can join the tax farm of this or that country. So it's not racial. Is it linguistic? No, it's not linguistic, because you can speak French and go and become a Brazilian citizen or whatever it is. So when you actually think about it, what's the only common denominator in all of this, apart from the kind of ideas they let you have, these sort of nostalgic sort of tourist attractions? It's just tax. It's just money. That's all it is. It's the only thing. It's the only thing that actually holds it all together. So we've got this idea that America, the American tax farm, is somehow this evil thing going around the world doing these terrible stuff. And it is. There's no question that particular tax farm has been sort of the golden boy over the last 50, 60, 70 years. Before that, obviously, it was the British. And then, go back to sort of, I don't know, the kind of Dutch banking dynasties and Venice and all these other places. It doesn't matter. It's all one thing. Now, the way they try to explain what's going on now with America's actions against Russia, if you have any understanding of the background to this, I'm not going to go into this now, but if you want some information, I would highly recommend listening to Scott Ritter for an hour. You'll have a jolly good idea of what his overall view is. Colonel Doug McGregor, again, you'll get a very good idea of what's actually going on the ground. There are a few others. If you want more detailed information, you can find that in various places. For example, the Gerrans. If you want that level of granularity. And there are other sort of satellites around these particular views, and clearly they are correct in terms of what's going on the ground. But it all kind of boils down to something that I don't fundamentally agree with, and it's not that I disagree with their military analysis. No, they're correct. They're right. That's what they're saying is true. It's that it kind of boils down to the explanations for it all. And I'm not just saying these particular people. I'm just saying in general. It's kind of explained away by either hubris on the point of the United States, stupidity on the part of the United States, or greed on the part of the United States. And this is the only explanation. Well, I definitely agree that these are facets. People are easily kind of persuaded that their political allegiances and their personal advancement are somehow in synergy. But I don't think this is the whole thing. I think this is in my view, and now obviously you're opening yourself up to be called names, conspiracy theorist and so on. But I call it being able to join the dots and think for myself. So if you're interested in what I think, I'm going to share it with you. So what I think is this: I don't buy into this idea of countries at all. I think it's a bit like it's a much better way of thinking of it is like the Mafia. They've got the city sewn up and divided up into areas, and these are just administrative delineations to make fleecing you lot easier. That's all it is. And anyway, they're looking to amalgamate all of this over time, and they do. For example, what do you think the European Union is, or the Union of the United States, or the Russian Federation for that matter, or even China? These are amalgams of smaller parts. I lived in Spain for a couple of years, and I kind of always thought of Spain as being one place, like one country. It's not one country at all. It's an empire. If you go to Madrid or Salamanca, we lived in Salamanca for about half a year, this is the kind of the kernel of Spain. This is the inner Spain where they speak proper Spanish and you can understand people. But if you go outside of this, if you go up to Galicia, it's a different mentality. These are Celts. And if you go over to, for example, Valencia, it's a different language. It's Valenciano. And then if you go down to Andalusia, which we also lived in for a while, this is almost a different language. They don't use their tongue, they don't use their lips, they appear to have no teeth, and it's blah, 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 you can't understand what they're saying. And I realized this is an empire. The core of this empire is Madrid. And it's concentric circles out of this, and it's all been kind of melded into one, but isn't really one thing, as the Catalans, I'm sure, would agree, and various other people too. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that our idea of countries is somewhat forced and contrived. So, in my view, this is actually a battle of agendas, but it's not like they are in complete disagreement with one another. I think what's going on is that there is this expedited version of a new world religion and culture, which is, and I'm not going to repeat everything I've said about technique before, but intrinsically, technique is the only arbiter, is the sole arbiter of what is allowed, and it atomizes society entirely and has no morals whatsoever. Okay, none whatsoever, zero. So you have, the paedophile agenda in the West, the homosexualization agenda in the West, destruction of the family, all of this expedited because it's just more efficient, you see. So that's one part of it. But you have another part, which is, I suppose, holding on to, I suppose you could call it the more sentimental part of the same agenda, because they agree on all of the basics, but they still want to hold on to things like, dare I say it, morality. But morality has no place in technique, has no place in it. It's an inefficient form of control. There are much better ways of control. For example, like what you just lived through over the last couple of years, where they told you that, there was this terrible disease that you need to, that wearing some sort of, piece of cloth over your face would protect you from it. But it wasn't about wearing a piece of cloth over your face. That wouldn't make any difference whatsoever. It was about control. It was about you showing that you obey and will obey what you're told to do. There you are. That's what it's really about. So I would say that it's really a kind of a tension between these two different types. So you've got, as it were, the active, the woke version of it, where it's just chaos and total insanity. Or you have the kind of conservative version of it, which is they still want the iPhones and, Pizza Hut and all the rest of it, but they hold to some sort of moral precepts. And that has to be destroyed, because you're not allowed to have a God beyond the government. By government, I don't just mean the people you vote for. I mean really the people who control them. Anyway, I was trying to make sense of this. And if you think about it, America isn't at all, in fact, fighting for its own advantage, very much at least. I mean, for example, let's look at it. It's got open borders. It's got a fentanyl epidemic. It's destroying systematically over the whole of my lifetime the very people who built it, which are white males. I mean, they are, absolutely prejudiced against on every single turn in the United States and certainly in Europe as well, not so in Russia. And it has all of this on a background of a policy of demoralization, sexual degeneracy, moral deprivation, and so on. And they export this ideology everywhere else. And this is really why they're attacking Russia. And if you look at Russia, Russia's 80% Russian. And you can't have that. This is why they hate Russia. Not because I don't think it's anything like fundamental. It's just that Russia refuses to get with the accelerated woke program of destroying its own, indigenous people and destroying its own society, just like America is doing, just like Europe is doing. So it doesn't hold true. You see, if America had closed borders and was actually, doing something sensible and creating a kind of moral society, and maybe more like it was in the 1950s, right? You could say, okay, well, that, it makes some sense. America is the aggressor. It wants to get richer. But that's not the case. It's destroying itself at the same time. So it doesn't make any sense that this is about hubris or this is about America. And I'm going to argue that it isn't. I'm going to argue that what you've actually got is an illusion. And that illusion is quite easy to understand. And basically works like this. You've got countries. So if you think of countries as being sort of vertical entities, you've got the UK, you've got, let's treat the EU as one country, you've got Russia as one country, China as one country, and America as one country. And then within that country, you've got your government, and you've got this and you've got that and your structures and all the rest of it. And to some extent that is true. But what's completely elided from the narrative is you have a horizontal structure as well, which is what I call the international caste system. So the people who run the, let's say, Sberbank in Russia, the guy who heads that up is going to have a whole lot more in common with the head of, I don't know, some big bank in America than he's going to have with his own people. That's a fact. And vice versa. The heads of, whatever it is, America Bank or whatever it is, they're going to have a lot more in common with that guy, even though he's Russian, than they are with their own people. They don't care about their own people. So the way that I would see it is that what you've got, rather than countries, what you've really got is like a sea of the tax-producing, value-producing herd. And then you have an archipelago which transcends this. It operates on a completely different level. It operates on the private jet level. Just as an aside, if you've ever been on a private jet, and I've been on quite a few, it's completely different. Okay, the people who make the laws that you have to obey, the people who make the laws that make you have to bend over and go through this ritual of submission in the airport, they don't go through that. If you've ever been on a private jet, and I have had to as part of my previous work, you don't go through that. No. You turn up at some little airport tucked out of the way somewhere, and you're asked if you'd like to take a seat, and you sit down on a very plush sofa, and some smiling woman brings you a cup of tea and asks if she could possibly have a look at your passport. So you hand it over, and she takes it away and smiling, comes back smiling, and then you get up and walk on the plane. That's it. That's the entire process. And it's the same when you get off the other end. It's completely different. And this is how the people who make the laws that you have to obey, this is how they live. Now, I'm not inveighing against it. I don't suffer from envy. I don't care. They're welcome to it and all of that. I'm just saying that they don't abide by the laws that you abide by. And you can basically transpose, you can extrapolate from this to see how the rest of it all works. So, while America, going back to this, is doubtless a psychopathic aggressor, there's no question that that's how it's conducting itself, it is also committing suicide. And this is really the interesting point. So it's thus the only idea, it's the only idea of America as a political state, the idea of America as merely a political state makes no sense. Why? Because it's committing suicide as well. And it promotes people who do the same. It advances midwits, mediocrities, and it does it as a policy. Read Ayn Rand, for goodness sake, Atlas Shrugged, or The Fountainhead's probably better. But this, you can see that they're promoting people who are unqualified to do even the basic jobs. And we've seen all this before. We had it in the Soviet Union. Exactly this. Promoting mediocrities. And it just destroys everything. And the people at the top of this, they're not, I don't believe they're as stupid as people choose to think. They know what they're doing. It's a recipe. If you want Victoria sponge cake, there's a way of getting it. If you want to destroy a country, there's a way of doing it. They know how this works. They've done it before. So the only answer that makes sense is that they want to do it. And that this war, the one in Ukraine, is a war against you. Which actually, to be fair, I said on day one. And it's the only answer that actually makes sense. So within this model then, Putin is the new Goldstein, the evil monster who can be blamed for all that you have to suffer. And I don't know if I've got some more notes here, but I think this is really the point that I want to make, that wars are really opportunities to reshape the domestic population. And they are understood in those terms by the people who choose to have them. Another point I wanted to make is that the attendees of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, they have more in common with each other than they do with you. And there are reasons for this. It isn't just about, quote unquote conspiracies, because of how they're educated. A lot of them are detached from any possibility of connecting with their own countries because of the way they're schooled. And so they actually have no country, most of these people. If you look at people who are the kind of mid-wit implementers of this, Burrell and van der Leyen and all of these sorts of people, they are transnational. They don't, sure, they may be born in Germany or Portugal or wherever it was, but they don't really have any connection with it because they've been doing this for so long that they are detached, and they certainly don't care about you. This isn't just callousness on their part. It would be impossible for them to, in the same way that you don't really care much, you might pretend you do, but actually you wouldn't, about Eskimos, because they're not part of your reality. That's how they feel about you. You're not a part of their reality. This isn't just callousness. Sure, they are psychopaths, and if they're not, they're not allowed to continue. But they don't care. They couldn't care because they haven't bonded with their own countrymen. And they are... All right. I once worked... I went to the United Nations building in Geneva as part of my previous incarnation of work that I used to do. I used to listen to people, talk to people. And they told me how it works. Once you're in this club, and this wasn't some sort of hushed conspiracy in the corner. This was somebody who was kind of boasting. He said, once you're in, and everything's taken care of. Your children go to the best schools. You've got you're guaranteed a certain amount of money. Your pension will be taken care of. You're part of this club now, and it takes care of its own. And they're terrified of losing that, firstly, so they're going to obey. And they don't regard you as anything other than basically the herd. Like a farmer would feel. A farmer, might care about his cows, but he's going to slaughter them. This isn't any question. That's how they feel about you. Exactly how they do. So and why would they feel any differently? So technique has its own agenda. I've got videos on technique down below, so you have a look at that. And the elites inherited this. They can't stop technique, which really began, I suppose, in earnest in the Enlightenment, which is, in essence, it's the application of reason and dogma, of rationale and of efficiency, and throwing under the bus any kind of thought of attachment to any kind of sentiment for anything which isn't purely pragmatic in material terms. Okay, so that process cannot be stopped by the elites. It's bigger than they are, but they can nudge it. They can nudge the rails this way or that way. So they have some influence over it. And they can apply it in different ways. For example, they can tell you that there's a virus and you have to be careful and you have to wear, you can only stand within 15 feet of your mother-in-law on a Tuesday if there's a full moon and all of this stuff. And people will just parrot this nonsense. So they can use it. They can use it against you in certain ways. So anyway, what I want to say is that in my view, I think these people, this kind of horizontal cast of world managers. Read Brave New World. These are the what was he called? Mustafa Mond. This is how they see themselves. This is really how they see themselves. And this isn't something to hate them for. You just need to understand this is what you're dealing with. I think myself that the people at the top of this, they see themselves as alchemists. So the technique is the fire, and wars of various kinds, whether they're wars like you have in Ukraine, or destroying the family, destroying sanity, destroying religion, and all of these. These are all wars. These are the elements. These are the chemicals that they're using, and they don't control every element. It's not sort of it's not as atomized as that. But they are able to put these things together to get outcomes. So what I'm trying to say is, one might see this war in Ukraine as a war between the New World Order and what they're now calling the Fair World Order. But I don't see it in those terms at all. I see this as they're taking these two elements and they're crushing them together, and they're gonna rub them together in order to create a third element. This is how they think. And also, of course, they can get a lot of Europeans murdered and killed at the same time, because they are, they like their blood rituals and all of that. So anyway, the war in Ukraine right now is several things. It is actually the end of World War II. These are the last battles of World War II. These are the battles of World War II that were kind of put in the freezer for 70, 80 years. But we now see that Europe and America are on the side of the Nazis, and Russia is still on the side of what was then called the Allies. But it's other things too. It's also a kind of a civil war, a bit more like the Balkans, because Ukraine was actually an artificial state. I'm not saying this to be nasty to Ukrainians, but it's just true historically. And most of that country, well, an awful lot of that country belongs to Russians. Some of it belongs to Hungarians, some of it belongs to Poles, some of it belongs to Romanians, and the actual part of it which is really, peopled by ethnic Ukrainians, quite small and actually not worth much. So it's at the end of World War II. It is a civil war, and it's also a colour revolution, as per what the United States and all the NGOs and all of these people roll out, and it's also the beginning of World War III. But it is also an alchemical process, as I say, crushing together apparent opposites in order to produce third element. And that's how I think the people at the top see this. So, as I said before, all sides of the equation agree on the same basic philosophy and religion. So Russia is no different at all to Europe, the European Union, America, Australia, anywhere else in terms of its basic propositions. It understands the world in the same way. It talks about progress, it has this idea of progress, has this idea that the purpose of life is to be happy. It has this idea of history unfolding in as I say, in never-ending progress. And there's one other idea, gone out of my head. Anyway, I've got a video about it. It believes in all these four things. It absolutely does. So its basic religion is the same. So it's not even such a strong opposition as between Shia and Sunnis, who both claim to be Muslims. They're much closer than that. It's much more like one form of Catholicism and another form of Catholicism. That's the only difference between Russia and the West. But even so, it's a big enough difference in order to create this tension, in order to then use the pestle and mortar in order to crush down these elements. I think that's what's going on. I don't think this is just about hubris on the side of America, because America is destroying itself. So the actual war is between this caste and you lot, you see, and I don't think that anything's changed. But to listen to the commentariat, oh yes, now these are people who, for years understood that there was, a new world order and an elite and all the rest of it. They seem to have just forgotten. These is sort of it seems bizarre to me that after understanding so much, they just decided, fair world order. And that must be great. Well, who could argue with that? And they've bought into this idea of the sort of the sovereign national state. What happened? What happened to all of that research? What happened to? It's all gone away. No. Now we're fully on board. Amazing. Anyway, In closing, given what the elites are doing to Europe and the US by means of this war that they've created and engineered in Ukraine against Russia, the idea that they are intentionally, quote unquote, against Russia, or at least it's against Russia specifically, and makes no sense because of how much they're making the US and Europe and the rest of the world suffer anyway, just after a huge round of having made them all suffer through the rollout of a pandemic. So for me, at least, what we're going through right now, I'm not saying that Russia isn't fighting an existential war. I believe it is. But I think that the people who engineered this war, certainly on the European and United States side, they're not fighting for the United States or Europe. This is a delusion. They're creating or trying to create through crisis and war an outcome that, sure, it's hurting their own countries, but they don't care because that's what they've been doing to their own countries for the last 100 and 200 years. I see it as a continuation of the same agenda. And I think it's really naive. And quite honestly, I'm surprised that nobody seems, at least that I've seen, hardly anybody seems to question this. So, in short, in closing, they see two groups, themselves and everyone else. I also think they're terrified. I think they know that it's all up for grabs now and the stakes are really high. I think that the people at the top of this are like the people I met in the United Nations in Geneva. I think they're terrified of being thrown off the bus, of losing all of their privileges, of losing their children's places at these wonderful schools that they go to in Luzerne or wherever it is. And the 4 holidays a year and the expense accounts. They don't want to lose that, so they're going to hold on to it. But also they want to hold on to it. That's where they feel happiest. They're not. I don't believe that they're really kind of fighting with their consciences. They don't feel about you the way you think they should, because what I'm trying to say in essence is this idea of a sovereign state is just a propaganda tool to keep you locked into not being able to understand how you're being shafted. I think that's really what I'm going to say. It's just the idea of country is just that. It's an idea which they use to distract you and control you. And when they're done with it, when they're finished with it, they'll just dump it. And in fact, they do dump it most of the time. But whenever they need a war or there's a football match to be played, they roll it out again and you're supposed to believe in it all over again. Anyway, those are my thoughts. In closing, I currently upload to Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube and Substack. So please like, share and subscribe on all platforms. It's free to do, but a valuable way of giving back. And subscribe on YouTube as well, because that helps the algorithm. I've had to learn about the algorithm. Go to samgerrans.com and drop your email in the box to subscribe to my Substack newsletter and get all new content delivered to your inbox. I back up my mailing list so that if big tech cancels me, we still have options. I work outside the mainstream and have no corporate sponsorship. If you value what I do, you can help keep the lights on at samgerrans.com/contribute or upgrade to a paid subscription on my Substack to access my more detailed work as well as comment. Substack being where I read all feedback. I continue to make my legacy projects available free. Summaries and links are at samgerrans.com/books. Finally, I post news, thoughts and announcements to my Telegram channel at t.me/samgerrans. Thanks for listening and bye for now.